When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
What if you could have a career where the opportunities are as vast as our nation, where it's not about mission statements, but a shared mission? At U.S. Customs and Border Protection, we go beyond to protect more than borders. From ship to shore, air to ground, cities to local communities, CBP agents and officers are keeping people safe. Join U.S. Customs and Border Protection and go beyond for something far greater than yourself. Learn more at cbp.gov/careers.
Well, John, so I look at the calendar and it tells me that this is apparently Easter weekend. Training camp is around the corner, but I walk outside and it feels like frickin' Christmas. When is this going to end?
I know. I'm just so sick of winter and so done with winter. It was remarkable. I cannot think of the last time I drove to my in-laws' place about an hour and a half from Saskatoon last night. And on my CRV, it said the air temperature was minus 29.
Yeah.
In March at like 9:30 at night. This is just hell. Climate change is clearly real because this has never happened before. And man, I'm so ready for football. I'm so ready for just something to melt. This is I'm starting to go stir crazy, man.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And I'm not supposed to be the guy that complains about the cold because I'm the guy who complains in the summer when it's too hot because this body, this lack of temple is not built for heat. So generally, I don't say anything during the winter. I keep my mouth shut. I just put more clothes on. I'm comfortable, but it's almost April. Let's stop already. We want football season to get here already. We don't want to have training camp open up and people are still out there in their parkas.
Exactly. Although I do think that people in Rider Nation would still show up to the University of Saskatchewan campus to watch the Riders go through their paces in training camp, even in the 10 feet of snow that's probably all over the turf right now. I don't know how much the team would like it, or a lot of the... Could you imagine being an American player coming up and seeing this kind of snow up here for the first time ever? Man, your CFL career is done the second you step off the plane.
Some kid from, like... I don't know, somewhere in southern Alabama, never seen snow in their life, and you get off the plane and it's minus 30 in May, and you're like, what have I done? I've made a huge mistake.
That's when you just turn around at customs and say, I'll take the next flight home.
Yeah, so we've had a little bit of a self-imposed hiatus because around here we're not just going to talk for the sake of talking. We don't like our own voices as it is, so we don't really need to force our voices upon yourselves when there's nothing to talk about. But some stuff has happened recently, nothing too huge, and there's been more quantity over quality, I guess, over the last little while for some to talk about. So, we'll get into CFL week. I was there. John was too lazy to come to Winnipeg.
Yeah, I do have that job thing that I need to pay those bill things, right, Joel?
I guess so. We'll get into John Chick, who just retired recently. We'll talk about John Ojo, and we'll talk about Duron Carter and his enthusiasm for baking. So we'll get into all of that. But first, John, we'll talk about it a little bit. So what's in your glass this week?
You're going to laugh. This is very uncharacteristic, but at face value, I'm drinking a Budweiser this week. But, before you go...
hang up on you?
Exactly.
I'll just do the rest of this myself. It's okay.
Oh, all right. You might as well just ramble along because I'm drinking a Budweiser. This Budweiser is the size of my forearm. My father-in-law was in Vegas. My mother and father-in-law are both there. He was blown away at how large these beer cans were. Yeah. It's like 3 beers in one can. I'm like, you know what? Hey, let's give it a shot. It is quantity over quality, just like the theme of this episode.
I guess it's somewhat a little fitting then, maybe. I don't know. I got I got a White Raven from Bench Creek. They're out of Alberta. It's a nice little IPA because it is Easter weekend, so it's got to be hoppy.
Dad joke. I like it.
But the cool little tidbit about Bench Creek is their owner, Andrew, is It's actually originally from Pilot Butte, Saskatchewan, so a little bit of a local connection for them as well. Which is kind
fantastic. Cool. No, I much would rather be drinking that, but when you have 3 beers in one can, you don't plan on getting off the couch for the rest of the night. That's, it's a convenience thing.
I won't ask why you're not getting off the couch when there's things you have to do to get off the couch in terms of when you're drinking beer, but anyway. We don't need to know how you're accomplishing those things, I guess. So, well, we'll start with, I guess, the newest thing to happen. This happened recently, and that is the retirement of John Chick. I think if you watched John over the last year and a bit, this news isn't maybe so surprising. It's clear that age and father time and the wear and tear of football has caught up to Mr. Chick a little bit, at least in the last year with down year in Hamilton, and then he tried to revive it again at Edmonton. Still the great guy, still the great team player he always was. They're just clearly that step back had happened, like it happens to a lot of guys. It happened a little later, to John's credit. He's been able to fight off father time for a little while, but I think for me, the big thing that I'm going to remember about John Chick is just the man that he is, and the man that he'll continue to be in post-retirement, I'm sure, because we've seen it across social media today, across the traditional media too, just the outpouring of support for this man who is clearly beloved from coast to coast by everyone in CFL circles, because he is just, what I'll remember is he is just the consummate professional. Whether the Riders were winning the Grey Cup or they were winning 3 games, you knew that John Chick was going to put in the work every week. He's going to put in the work every game, and he was going to play every single snap like it was his last, and he was not going to take a play off.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of those guys you always love talking to. I remember one of my first training camps covering the Riders. It was really a privilege to talk to John Chick. He's thoughtful. He's well-spoken. It takes a bit because he's such a mountain of a man. He doesn't have this loud, booming, boisterous voice, but everything that he says is eloquent. It's well put together. And again, just a universally loved and respected man. And to say he's retiring, I am stealing this from Chris Cuthbert off of Twitter, but to say a man with 8 children is retiring, I'm sure he would have liked to keep playing rather than continue to have to go and deal with 8 children. I have 1 in my house that is a disaster. I couldn't imagine 8 and the amount of work that would put in, but it is great that John is going to get to spend some time with that large family. He's a man of value. He's a man of integrity. And it is good, too, to see him kind of going on his own terms. You mentioned that, Hamilton and Edmonton last year wasn't his greatest of years, but it's not like he's being cut and desperately trying to find a team and then signing a token one-day contract someplace. No, he saw the end of his career coming, went out on his terms, and it's a good way to go out for John Chick. Although I have 2 very very good memories of John Chick, not even from like the training camp days, Joel. The first time I met John was at the first training camp, interviewed him several times, and he was one of those guys, he'd ask you how your day was going and stuff. So it was a few months later, it was after the season at a charity event, and I spotted John, and it was like a VIP reception. So John and I are talking, and somebody walks up, a friend of mine says, Hey, Fraser, have you told me you're a Bomber fan? And there's this awkward silence. And John Chick looks at me, not with rage, but with this disappointed, like, I felt like I had hurt him look in his eye.
It's a man who's had several children, probably disappointed from time to time. So he's given that look before, I'm sure. So he's very experienced when it comes to that.
It was disappointment and sadness in his eyes. And he just looks, he's like, how can you cheer for them after getting to know us guys? And I genuinely felt shame. Like, if anything was going to make me convert from team to team, it was going to be that moment. So later on that evening, John Chick, in full disclosure, he does not drink. So when John Chick's just having a good time, he's having a good and sober time. And he was relaxed and enjoying it. So later on, as the night goes on, I had a friend of mine, part of this event committee, who was notorious for his leg wrestling skill. Like, I'm a pretty good leg wrestler. You know, I got big calves and a fairly large badonkadonk. I can flip most people. This guy made a mockery of me. So the evening goes on. Again, this is after the season's done. So finally, he convinces John Chick to leg wrestle him. And I don't think really John Chick knew what he was doing. But this legend of a man, this accountant with the leg of legend, took down John Chick in the first match of a best-of-3 leg wrestle. And then John Chick figured it out and beat him quite soundly the next 2. But he is still the only man to defeat the accountant with the glorious leg ever in a leg wrestle, at least that I've seen.
As far as you've seen anyway, yeah. I mean, he's an athlete, so he's going to figure that out. But I mean, hey, your accountant buddy there has a story that he'll be able to tell for the rest of his life. It's like a story I was told at CFL week by Three Down Nation's John Hodge, where a buddy of his ended up in the Manitoba Playdowns, and they were basically a beer league team. They were kind of like if you or I were out there trying to compete against the best in Manitoba, right? Yeah. Where and of course the Manitoba Playdowns, where I know we're getting into some hashtag 8N Nation stuff here, but
yes, I love it.
And so what happened was, apparently he told the story, so they managed to get their way into this. I forget the exact backstory, but the fact was they were the 32 seed and they had to play the 1 seed in the first matchup, which, John, as you know, would mean they were playing Mike McEwen in the very first game, and they got slaughtered, but they achieved their goal in that game. And that was to score a single point against Mike McEwen, and they did it. By God, they scored a point against Mike McEwen. And you know what? I would be so proud if I did that too.
Yeah, I would too. I think I'd be even more proud to do it now that Mike has joined up with my good friend Colin Hodgson on Team Reed Carruthers to form a Manitoba super team there. I don't think I'd get a single point on them, Joel. I think you and I
definitely would
play. We could play a 16-end game and not end up getting a single point.
That's probably fair, unless he literally said, okay, enough is enough. I'm just going to bump you in, so we'll just stop the charade already.
Something like that. World's longest curling game. We'll do it for charity.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So that's completely unrelated, but kind of related at the same time. But it does kind of transition us into CFL week, which just happened last weekend.
Yeah. You were in Winnipeg. It looked like you were having a great time.
Yeah, it was fun. It's outside of actually being involved with the CFL stuff. It's always fun to be hanging around with Drew and Dunk and Haji and all those guys, because I really only see Haji about once a year, because he only makes it out to about CFL week because he is a teacher as his day job. So Grey Cup doesn't really work out for him timing-wise, understandably so. So, I mean, it was fun. It was a good time. The CFL made some interesting tweaks to the week overall, because I didn't remember until I got there that last week CFL week started on Tuesday in Regina. It didn't start. Right. It didn't start until Thursday in Winnipeg. But the organized overall, the league seemed fairly happy with it. They said the day numbers were pretty good. They were above Regina in terms of the crowd during the day when the families and all that kind of stuff is coming. The nights maybe weren't as strong. The combine seemed fairly well attended. So overall, I think it was maybe not the smashing success that we saw last year, but that partly because of expectations last year where no one had any idea what to expect out of this thing. So they go to Winnipeg. It looks like it did fairly well. It doesn't mean it still can't get better. We'll get into that for a second in terms of some changes that they made that I'm not really sure a lot of them were good ideas and maybe some different things they can do going forward. But being there, it seemed fun. It seemed well attended. It seemed like Winnipeg embraced this, even though, I mean, you can't blame them right now because Jets Mania has taken over that city with how darn good that hockey team is. But they were still able to pay attention to this event and give it the attention it deserves, with some caveats and some things that need to change going forward. I guess it's from the outside, John, what did you maybe think of what you saw from the week?
Well, I found it was almost a little muted on social media, right? There was some stuff going on, and maybe that's just because of the spread of people I follow, but I'm a Jets fan, I'm a Bombers fan, my dad's from Winnipeg, so I got lots of family in the city, so my feed is very Winnipeg centric, right? A lot of Winnipeg radio personalities, a lot of obviously Winnipeg sports reporters, a lot of CFL guys, a lot of fellow podcasters, and it just seemed oddly quiet on social media. The pictures I saw and the people I spoke to said, yeah, it was well attended. Seems like people were having a good time, but it was like when it was in Regina, every time I opened up my feed, it was like, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. While Winnipeg, it seemed to be an afterthought. I would also say largely because of the Jets' success, but it was just surprising to me that there wasn't more, exposure, especially in some of the local media channels, or maybe some more of the local media guys covering it. And again, like I said, it's that city's a little Jets crazy right now, but I don't know. From an outsider perspective, it looked like a fun event, a good event, a well-organized event, but it just didn't seem to have that oomph that, at least exposure-wise, that it did while it was in Regina. Now, that being said, one place I did pleasantly notice a lot more exposure was, and you actually wrote an article talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was you, with Rogers Sportsnet now having a chunk of the Toronto Argos, and you're watching Randy Ambrosie on with Tim and Sid, which is almost unheard of back in the day, and actually getting, some love, some respect out of Rogers Media, but it was oddly muted. Like, it seemed good, and that just worries me. Where else can you go with this event is what I say. Can you really... Do you want to put it in Edmonton? Do you maybe... I get you can't move it later. I mean, you can't have it in May because training camps have started, unless you run it in conjunction with a team's training camp, but then you can't have your best players there. But I just think that CFL Week in its current incarnation is destined for 3 markets, maybe... I would say
I don't know if that's entirely fair, but...
But I would say this thing would be a large success in Regina, Winnipeg, Ottawa, and Hamilton. I think it goes over like a wet blanket in Montreal, Toronto. I would even dare say Edmonton, Calgary, depending on how their local hockey teams are doing. It's a lot to take in, and I don't know if it's going to become that mass appeal thing that people are going to travel for that they're kind of hoping for.
Well, no, we discussed that a lot at CFL. We kind of where this event is headed. I think it's unrealistic to expect it to be Grey Cup 2, where you get people traveling great distances for this thing. You might get, I've decided for me personally, I'll go to this thing if it's within driving distance. Unless 3 Down Nation wants to start flying me out to these things, I'm not going to go to them if I have to fly. So that puts me, if it's in Edmonton, Calgary, or Winnipeg, or Regina, or I guess maybe even Saskatoon, who knows, I'll go. But it seems like it's an event that's going to be built largely on the success of the locals, and it has to be the locals that come out to do this. And I think we saw that it was best highlighted on the Friday when they had the Bombers tailgate, touchdown Manitoba, whatever they called it at this thing. They had it in the afternoon from 3 to 6, and we were all sitting there thinking, why would you do this in the afternoon? You're the host team. And then it turned out they wanted to make it basically a tailgate for the Jets, which actually was a really smart idea for them playing that night.
I'd say, That
was really smart, that game. And then they had Riderville that night, so apparently the league had asked the Riders to try this. Now, whether Riderville continues at CFL Week in the future is another question, because, well, me and the crew, we got there. It was granted, it was a little later because we had some work to do and some other things to do, so we didn't really get to Riderville until about 10:30, 11, and it was basically a ghost town. Most of the people were there were league employees, or they were employees of the booze sponsors or whatever. But I don't know how well that event particularly went over at night, especially up against the Jets game. So, because for the most part, there were a lot of Bomber jerseys around. There were a lot of Bomber fans around, which is good. And so it looks like the future of this event is, okay, we put it somewhere, and we got to make sure that people in town come out, because we can't really expect other people to show up from this thing. Anyone that comes from another city for this essentially is gravy, because based on what you do with this event, paying a few $100s a night over a course of a few nights to stay at a hotel isn't really worth it. So if you go somewhere and you have family to stay with, you might do it. But for the most part, I think for the average Joe, it's not really worth it. Now, in terms of the league exposure, you talked about this, and I thought it was interesting when you looked at this week compared to last week's. Is I remember last year, the CFL on their Facebook page, they did the CFL Live every single day. They had different events. There was a lot of different things, and even at the Fan Fest, they had panels I think every day talking. You could talk to these players this day, these player this day, these coaches this day. And there was none of that in Winnipeg. They did the CFL Live one night. They had players out for autographs most days and nights, which was fine. But there still wasn't really the opportunity to sit down and really ask these guys a lot of questions. It was kind of more the line of autographs. You get your 10 seconds and you're out. So I wonder what made them think that was a good way to go, because I think the interactivity, the being able to really, connect and talk to these players on a different level compared to just getting an autograph and moving on with your life, was something that I think worked in Regina. It might work going forward. You say, hey, here's a panel of 4 different players from 4 different teams. Go ahead and ask them anything. And you're just the fans. This isn't even from media perspective. The media thing was the same thing. It was fine. It was great. The fan perspective, I'm like, well, you took away something from last year's that was kind of cool, and didn't really replace it with anything similar, and that is kind of what stood out to me. I think the Thursday to Sunday worked a lot better than Tuesday to Sunday, especially outside of Regina. It might have been a little long, but the fact that there wasn't these panels for the fans to talk to, I found that an interesting decision by the league.
I would agree, because I as someone that's been to several Grey Cups, I was almost surprised the first Grey Cup I went to is how popular the fan state of the league is, because fans get to walk in and ask the commissioner questions. Like, we're talking, that's at like 10 a.m. on a Saturday when, everybody's been boozing until everything got shut down the night before, and everybody's still there with bells on for their chance to interact. And that it seemed like, even from an outsider, that was taken away. And that was one of the things that makes our game unique, is the ability to connect with these guys, because you alluded to it, just the 10 seconds handshake autograph. Again, you can do that at most practice fields. Teams are good enough to stick around and get a couple autographs. So I think it did lack something, and I hope they look at going back to the other direction.
Absolutely. And so we'll see what happens next year. There's a talk about it going to Edmonton. I think with Edmonton doing Grey Cup this year, that's a bit much. It looks like Calgary's probably going to be hosting Grey Cup in 2019, so they don't work. So Hamilton the city council there can't decide what the heck's going on with that stadium and the litigation, so it seems like they're forever screwed. Sorry for everyone in Hamilton, because frankly, Hamilton, I think, deserves this. They deserve the Grey Cup next year more than anything, but if they can't get that, they should at least figure something out to get this thing there, to give the city of Hamilton something for how good of a market it's been for this league for so long. But so to me, I guess, with you, to me that leaves Ottawa as a logical spot for this next year, because the Western markets, as I've said, don't really work. Vancouver, you can't go there yet. There's way too much going on there. So it seems like it's Ottawa next year, because there's some people have suggested Halifax, but I'm like, let's hold off on that. I think we discussed this a little bit in Winnipeg, where you maybe take it to Halifax. So if you say, okay, in 2022, we know the Atlantic Schooners are going to start playing football. So that offseason, the offseason before that, that's when you bring it there to try and get some interest going.
I would absolutely agree. And I think two other cities that it could work in as well would kind of be like your Quebec City. I think there's
Quebec City would love the Combine, because half the people there are from Laval anyway. So
that's exactly it. I mean, and that's what I think the draw would be. And I think, and maybe it's because I live here, but I think Saskatoon would work. And even to that, I almost think Saskatoon would work. Yeah, Saskatoon is almost one of those other cities that we're, there's so much provincial pride for the Riders. There's so many sports fans here. There's a lot that goes on, but I mean, if CFL week came here to Saskatoon, your only competition is a Blades team that is completely irrelevant, that people aren't going to games anymore, and the lacrosse team that everybody loves that's really only going on once a week, right? I mean, so your Saturday night, a CFL week, just, hey, go to the Rush, say, hey, do you mind playing out of town that weekend? Yeah, no problem. If the Rush have a road game, people would love it on a Saturday night. Riderville would be just jam-packed if it were to come to Saskatoon.
Yeah. As long as Saskatoon has a good indoor facility that's readily available that fans can go to, because the turf was an issue in Winnipeg for day one of the Combine, where they had the carpet laid down that wasn't very good at all, and players were slipping all over it, and it was affecting 40 times. But other than that, it was a well-run event, and there isn't really too much to complain about in terms of this, especially when it comes to this league that has made some pretty big blunders in the past.
Well, absolutely. And Saskatoon, just to vouch for the city, I'm proud to call home. Saskatoon, A, you'd have the big convention center at Prairieland Park where you could do all the fan stuff. And then B, as well, we do have the soccer center here that has some indoor turf that's permanently installed, and as far as I know is decent enough. I've never played on the stuff myself, but I haven't heard a lot of negative things. So that's where your Combine could easily be held.
All right, so switching gears, the Riders in the news a little bit again this week. One, kind of a positive situation, the other kind of a not so much but kind of funny at the same time situation. We'll start with the latest addition, signing defensive back John Ojo. He spent some time down south after time in Edmonton. For me, this is another one of those signings where, in a vacuum, it's great.
Yep.
The guy clearly is a very good football player, and anyone in the CFL would want him on their team. The issue for me remains, and I know I'm beating the dead horse here again, this is another guy that they've signed. that they're bringing in to make their team better because they haven't developed anyone. And to me, that just continues to be the main issue here. Individually, all these guys they've signed, I have zero issue with in a vacuum. But when you look at the big picture, it's like, okay, at some point, you have to start figuring out something internally, or this house of cards is going to fall again, like it did in 2015.
Well, and that's it. I'm starting to see some parallels here. Maybe not to the degree of 2013 when they were hosting the Grey Cup, but you're starting to see the Riders in on every really top free agent. They're signing their own top guys, Canadian or American. They're throwing out money. They're going to be a cap team, if not slightly over in that. Okay, you were over the cap. Let's give you the little slappy on the wrist here.
The first 100K over is a luxury tax anyway, so if I was the Riders, I'd go over all the time because you can afford it. But that's another discussion.
Exactly. That's another discussion for another day. But for today, as you mentioned, the Ojo signing in a vacuum is fantastic. But it goes back to you and I are both big believers that, when they assembled this management super team and they brought in Chris Jones and everything started happening, they wanted to be the Calgary Stampeders, where everybody seemingly comes out of nowhere. Next thing you know, they're one of the top players in the league, and they've got those guys behind them. But you put it best, Joel. It is appearing again like a house of cards in 2013. Sign all the biggest names, sign all the best players you can, hope for success that year, and then, just hope that it's not too bad of a sting if you haven't developed anybody. So does it make them better for this year? Absolutely. Does it continue to solidify them as a Grey Cup contender? Absolutely. Does it mean they're going to be a Grey Cup contender in 2 years? I think, again, they're taking a step back because there's another guy that you're not developing, and there's more playing time for a guy you're giving big money to who's also taking up a spot for a guy to develop.
Yeah, eventually, this is not to say that the Saskatchewan Roughriders can't win a Grey Cup this year or next. I think that could entirely happen, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the plan, is to say, hey, we need to do whatever we can to win a Grey Cup this year, great, that's fine. Just come out and say it and just go for it, and then I have no issues with that. But for me, this is just a personal, not personal maybe it's wrong, but it's just how I view sports. I'm a roster build nerd kind of guy. And I wish this is where, if the league had more transparency, where we knew the money, we knew the contract lengths, we knew everything, so we could play with the cap and see how pieces fit in, because I do that in hockey. I do that not quite as much in the NFL because the NFL cap is kind of complicated. But in the NHL, I do it a lot where especially with my teams, I sit there and I look and I'm like, okay, you get rid of these guys and, the cap works better and you can add, this, and this. And you can't do that in the CFL. And for me, I just think the Riders are just adding and adding and adding and adding. And there's it feels like eventually something is going to happen because we see it across the world in sports. I mean, other than baseball where there is no cap per se. Eventually, if your entire development system basically is free agency, you can win short term, but it's always in the long run, it's never going to work out. And that just continues to be my point in this. And I mean, I don't really know what else there is to say about that when it comes to this at that point.
No, exactly. You're right, Joel. John Ojo makes them better. In the long term, though, it's going to make them better this year, maybe into next. But again, they're not going to hit that level of consistency that Calgary and even Edmonton's starting to achieve now on a regular basis. Yeah,
and we'll see where it goes, and that's basically all you can say there. Another guy that they've signed last year, they re-signed this year, and has had an interesting offseason, we'll say, is Duron Carter. And there was the news last week at CFL Week reported by TSN's Dave Naylor that it looks like that his pot possession charges are essentially going to be relegated to nothing if not thrown out, because it appears that they were just pot cookies, which kind of obviously that shows the weight difference between a huge pile of pot and just a few cookies, because there's a discrepancy there. So, I mean, it's kind of funny. This would, of course, happen to Duron. And I think the interesting thing that came really out of this whole thing was the fact that CFL Commissioner Randy Ambrosie, 2-3 Down Nations, Drew Edwards said, we need to think about the future and how we enforce pot ourselves with the legal changes that are coming at some point in this country. I think that's really the only question around this, because it was kind of a non-issue for the most part, it seemed like, and now it definitely is at this point.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, the original weight that you had heard on both occasions, you were thinking, oh, my goodness, this is a considerable amount of pot. These could be serious charges. And then when you find out it's cookies, and then which percentage of the cookie is the actual pot, and then you're going, oh, okay, well, now this is just silly. This stuff's going to be legal here in a few months. Yeah, it completely changes the ball game. I think the league is doing the smart thing. There's a real good chance that by at least week 2 of this season, from the sounds of it, the stuff's going to be legal here in Canada. Yeah. And I think if his charges get thrown out, which all indications are that they will, I don't think the league needs to act in any kind of way other than tell him, hey, maybe don't offer a border guard a pot cookie because, or hey, listen, Duron, get better at baking so you can hide the smell. Make him in lemon or something. How the hell would you ever pick up the smell of an edible when it was lemon? Because lemon has such a hard, edible lemon bars. I got a great lemon bar recipe. Duron, I'm sure you got a great recipe how to mix the thing into the stuff. I'll send you my recipe. I feel like it would be beneficial to you in the whole you not getting arrested again thing.
So it's funny you mentioned Duron Carter getting better at baking and you have the lemon recipe and everything, because driving home today, I was thinking about it and I don't know why this thought came to my head. And I was like, wouldn't it be great if Duron Carter now appeared on some kind of baking challenge show? I think there's one someone was telling me about. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm going to get around to it on Netflix called Nailed It, where apparently just average people compete in some kind of baking championships. Now, it's not like the ones where these people have no idea what they're doing. They kind of have a general idea of how to make something. So then they just get told, okay, tonight you are making an apple pie, go. And then it becomes a thing. So I thought, oh my God, how amazing would it be on this episode if Duron Carter showed up and it was a cookie challenge? Well, I would watch the heck out of that episode. CFL wants to get through to millennials. Get him on Nailed It on Netflix.
or go back to remember when they first brought over Iron Chef, the poorly dubbed Iron Chef?
Yeah. And
there was always the big dramatic secret ingredient reveal. Yeah. What if you had Duron Carter on that, and it was the secret ingredient is pot, and then he makes his best pot cookie, and we can badly dub it,
yeah,
and it'll be fantastic. I'm with you. I'd watch the heck out of that.
Yeah, that even better is there's the show Beat Bobby Flay. So if he can get through someone else on something, he can go up against Bobby Flay, and his signature dish could be pot cookies, and Bobby would just be like, what? That'd be so good.
I bet you Bobby Flay knows how to make a good pot cookie.
Oh, probably. I don't know.
He's
not great at baking. That's his thing. He could probably make something with pot and Fresno chilies, but I don't know about a cookie.
Could he make a pot roast?
Probably, yeah.
Whoa, just blew your mind.
Yeah, and yeah. I think we've.
I think we just Costanza'd. I think I'm just going to leave. I'm going to hang up on you. Boom, done.
Yeah, I promise you there have been no cookies made or eaten during the recording of this podcast.
Just half my giant Budweiser.
Yeah.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply. When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.